My boss fired me because his nephew needed experience. 6 months later, and they are begging me to save their company. The phone rang for the third time in 10 minutes, and I was elbow deep in a transmission pan when my boss leaned into the bay and told me his nephew was starting Monday. He needs experience, he said, like that explained everything. I nodded because I'd learned not to argue with him about family. 7 years at that shop taught me when to keep my mouth shut. The kid showed up in a brand new hoodie and spotless work boots that had never seen grease. He stood in the middle of the bay like he was waiting for someone to hand him a script. My boss clapped him on the shoulder and told me to show him the ropes. I gave him the oil change bay. Simple, hard to mess up. He stripped the drain plug on the second car. I heard the wrench slip and the metal shriek, and I looked over just in time to see him yank the plug free, with half the thread still clinging to the bolt. He held it up like a trophy and said, "Got it!" I walked over. The pan was a mess. The plug was ruined. He'd have to retap the whole thing, or the customer was driving home with a slow leak. "You need to feel the resistance," I said. "If it fights you, stop." He shrugged. It came out, didn't it? I didn't say anything. I just grabbed the tap kit and fixed it myself while he wandered off to ask my boss where the bathroom was. By closing time, 2 customers were back. One said his tire pressure light was still on. The other said the rattle I'd promised to check was somehow worse. I looked at the work orders. Both had the nephew's initials scrawled in the corner. My boss waved them off with free air fresheners and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I stayed late and redid both jobs. The next morning, he called me into his office before I'd even clocked in. The nephew was sitting in the corner, scrolling his phone. My boss didn't look at me when he said the word restructuring. "We're tightening up," he said. "Cutting overhead, you know how it is." I didn't know how it was. I knew I'd been there 7 years. I knew I'd built half the client base from scratch. I knew the nephew had been there 2 weeks and couldn't tell a torque wrench from a pry bar. But I also knew what restructuring meant when family was involved. "When?" I asked. "End of the week." I nodded. I didn't argue, I didn't ask questions. I just walked back to my toolbox and started packing. The customer list was in my phone. Every name, every number, every repeat client who'd asked for me by name. I'd built that list one alignment and one brake job at a time, and I'd kept it backed up because I wasn't stupid. I didn't say goodbye to the nephew. I didn't shake my boss's hand. I just loaded my tools into the bed of my truck, sent a few texts to clients I trusted, and drove to the industrial park on the east side where I knew a guy renting out bay space for cheap. I didn't burn bridges, I didn't trash talk, I just worked. The first client who showed up said he'd been calling my old shop for a week and nobody picked up. He asked if I could take a look at his alternator. I told him I could have it done by noon. He paid cash and left me a 5-star review before he even drove off the lot. I didn't think about my old boss again until the phone rang 6 months later, and I heard his voice on the other end, shaking in a way I'd never heard before. I rented the bay the same afternoon I got laid off. It was tucked behind a tire shop that had been half closed for years, just a concrete box with a lift and a drain pit, and a roll-up door that stuck halfway. The owner wanted $200 a month and didn't ask questions. I handed him cash, and he gave me a key on a twist of wire. I spent the weekend cleaning, swept out the cigarette butts and the oil-stained cardboard, scrubbed the walls, hung my toolbox on a pegboard I bought from the hardware store. I printed business cards at the copy shop downtown, just my name, my number, and the word honest in bold under the header. Monday morning, I started calling. I didn't pitch. I didn't apologize. I just said I'd open my own place, and if they needed work done, I was available. Most of them didn't even let me finish. They said they'd been trying to reach me at the old shop, and nobody ever called back. One guy said he'd brought his truck in for a brake job 3 weeks ago, and it still pulled to the left. Another said they charged him for a fuel filter, and he was pretty sure they just wiped the old one down and put it back. I told them I could take a look, free of charge. By Wednesday, I had 6 appointments booked. By Friday, I was turning people away because I didn't have the hours. I worked alone. No help, no shortcuts. I pulled every part myself, double-checked every torque spec, and walked each customer through what I'd found before I touched anything. I took pictures. I showed them the worn pads, the cracked hoses, the bolts that had been cross-threaded and painted over. I let them see the work. They paid in cash, they tipped, they left reviews. Within 2 weeks, I had a waiting list. I didn't talk about my old boss. I didn't have to. The clients who came to me had stories, and they told them to each other in the waiting area I'd set up with 2 folding chairs and a space heater. One woman said she'd paid $400 for a timing belt replacement, and her engine seized 2 weeks later. A guy in a Dodge said they'd charged him for an alignment, and he could still feel the car drifting. Another said they told him his catalytic converter was shot and quoted him $1,200, but when he took it to the muffler shop down the street, they said it was fine. I listened, I nodded, I didn't add fuel, but I heard the name of my old shop over and over, and every time the story got worse. One morning, a client showed up with a printout from Yelp. She slid it across my workbench and asked if I used to work there. I glanced at it. The page was full of 1-star reviews, all from the last month. Charged for parts never installed. Rude service. Wouldn't honor the warranty. Tried to upsell unnecessary work. I handed it back. I did. Not anymore. She smiled. Good. That's why I'm here. I didn't check the reviews myself. I didn't need to. I was too busy fixing the mess they'd left behind. A regular brought in his wife's sedan because the check engine light wouldn't go off. I plugged in the scanner and pulled 3 codes, all related to the oxygen sensor. I looked at the invoice from my old shop, dated 2 weeks prior. They charged her $350 to replace it. I pulled the sensor. It was the factory original, still stamped with the VN sticker. They hadn't touched it. I showed her the part. She stared at it for a long time, then asked if I could fix it for real. I did. I charged her parts and labor, nothing extra. She left me a $100 tip and a review that got shared in half the neighborhood Facebook groups by the end of the day. The work kept coming. I started opening at 6 in the morning and didn't close until 9 at night. I ate lunch standing up, drank cold coffee out of a thermos, and slept 4 hours a night because I couldn't afford to turn anyone away. I hired a kid from the community college to help with oil changes and tire rotations, paid him fair, and taught him the same way I'd wanted to teach the nephew. Slow, careful, with respect for the machine and the customer. He learned fast. He didn't strip a single bolt. By the end of the first month, I'd made more than I ever had working for someone else. By the end of the second, I'd paid off the deposit on the bay and started looking at a bigger bigger space. I didn't gloat. I didn't post about it. I just kept my head down and did the work. But I heard things. A buddy who still lived near the old shop said the parking lot was empty most days. Another said the Yelp page had been flagged so many times the owner couldn't respond to reviews anymore. Someone else told me the nephew had been caught trying to sell used brake pads as new, that a customer had filmed him swapping the parts in the bay and posted it online. I didn't watch the video. I didn't need to. I just kept working. And when the phone rang one evening in late spring and I saw the name on the screen, I almost didn't answer. But I did. I heard his voice, thin and tight, like he'd been holding his breath for days. "I need your help," he said. I didn't say anything right away. I just stood there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to him breathe on the other end. "You still there?" he asked. "I'm here. I need your help," he said again. Slower this time, like I hadn't heard him the first time. I wiped my hands on a rag and leaned against the workbench. "With what?" He hesitated. I could hear something in the background. Voices, maybe a radio. "Things have been tough lately. I've had some staffing issues, some customer complaints. I thought maybe you could come back for a bit, help me smooth things over." I didn't laugh. I wanted to, but I didn't. "You laid me off," I said. I know. That was a mistake. I see that now, but I'm in a bind here. And you know the business better than anyone. You know the clients. They trust you. They trusted me when I worked for you too. Didn't stop you from letting me go." He exhaled, long and shaky. "Look, I'll pay you. Double what you were making before. Just come back for a couple months. Help me get things back on track." I looked around the bay. My bay. The lift I'd learned to operate in the dark because the light switch was on the far wall. The pegboard I'd organized by hand. The invoices stacked in a milk crate that proved every job I'd done clean. "I'm good," I said. "Please, I'm serious. I'll make it worth your time." I said I'm good. I hung up. He called back twice that night. I didn't answer. By the next morning, I'd forgotten about it. I had a Civic on the lift with a blown head gasket and a guy waiting on a quote for a transmission flush. I didn't have time to think about anything else. But then the text started. A buddy from the parts supplier sent me a screenshot. It was a message my old boss had posted in a regional mechanics group, asking if anyone knew a good tech who could start immediately, willing to pay top dollar, desperate for reliable help. Another friend sent me a photo. The old shop's parking lot, empty except for 2 cars and a tow truck idling by the curb. Then a client forwarded me a post from a neighborhood forum. Someone had written a long complaint about getting charged for a radiator flush they never received. And when they went back to argue, the nephew told them to take it up with corporate. The shop didn't have corporate. It was a standalone garage that had been family run for 30 years. The comments under the post were worse. People sharing their own stories, posting photos of invoices with circled line items that didn't make sense. One guy uploaded a video of his engine bay, pointing at a belt that was frayed and cracked, saying he'd paid to have it replaced 2 weeks ago. Another said they'd been charged for synthetic oil and got conventional. I read through it all during my lunch break, standing in the bay with a sandwich I didn't finish. The kid I'd hired looked over my shoulder. "That's where you used to work?" "Yeah." "Man, that's bad." I didn't say anything. I just pocketed my phone and went back to work. 2 days later, my parts supplier called me directly. "Hey, I wanted to give you a heads up," he said. "Your old boss has been trying to poach people. He called me asking if I knew any techs looking for work. Offered to pay a finder's fee." "What did you say?" I told him I didn't know anybody, but he's calling around. He's panicking. I thanked him and hung up. That afternoon, I got another call. A woman I didn't recognize. She said she'd found my number online and wanted to know if I did free estimates. I told her I did. She said she'd been to 3 shops already and nobody could figure out why her car was stalling. She'd spent over $1,000 and it was still doing it. I told her to bring it by. She showed up an hour later in a Camry that idled rough and smelled like burnt oil. I popped the hood and saw it immediately. Someone had replaced the air filter with the wrong size, and it wasn't seated properly. The engine was sucking in unmetered air and throwing the fuel mixture off. I pulled the filter and showed her. "This is a filter for a 4-cylinder. You've got a V6. It doesn't fit." She stared at it. The last place told me they replaced it. They did. They just put in the wrong one. That was my old mechanic, the one on Maple. I didn't need her to say the name. I already knew. I put in the right filter, cleared the codes, and test drove it myself. It ran smooth. I charged her $30. She cried in my waiting area and left me a review that got screenshotted and shared in 4 different groups by the end of the night. The calls picked up after that. I started getting clients who specifically mentioned they'd seen the posts about my old shop and wanted someone they could trust. I had to start turning people away again, even with the kid helping. I looked into renting a second bay, maybe bringing on another tech, but I didn't want to move too fast. I wanted to do it right. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, a black pickup pulled into my lot and parked crooked across 2 spaces. I was under a Jeep when I heard the door slam. I rolled out and saw my old boss walking toward me, hands in his pockets, smiling too wide. "Hey," he said, "you got a minute?" I stood up, wiped my hands, and didn't say anything. He looked around the bay, nodding like he was impressed. "You've done well for yourself. I heard you've been busy." "I have been." "That's great. That's really great." He rocked on his heels. "Listen, I wanted to come by and talk to you in person. I think we got off on the wrong foot last time. I was stressed, you know? Things have been tough. But I've been thinking, maybe we could work together. Partner up. Combine resources. You've got the client base. I've got the infrastructure. We could do something big." I stared at him. He kept smiling. "I'm serious," he said. 50-50 split. We could rebrand, start fresh. I'll even put your name on the sign." I crossed my arms. "You want to partner with me?" "Exactly. After you laid me off so your nephew could take my job." His smile twitched. "That was a business decision. You understand that?" "I do." "So what do you say?" I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I nodded once. "Sure," I said. "If you pay me hourly for consulting during your collapse." His smile dropped. "What? You heard me. You want my help, you pay me by the hour, and I'm expensive." He stared at me, mouth half open, like I'd just spoken a language he didn't understand. I picked up my wrench and turned back to the Jeep. "Get out of my bay," I said. He didn't move for a few seconds. Then I heard his boots on the concrete, slow and heavy, and the sound of his truck door slamming. I didn't look up until I heard him drive away. The next week, I started seeing the tow trucks. First one came on a Tuesday morning. I was replacing spark plugs on a Ford when I heard the diesel rumble outside. I looked up and saw a flatbed backing into my lot with a Honda Accord strapped down. The driver hopped out, clipboard in hand. "You the owner?" "Yeah. Got a delivery. Customer said to bring it here. Said she doesn't trust the other place anymore." I walked over and looked at the work order clipped to his board. board. The car had been at my old shop 2 days ago for a brake job. According to the invoice, they'd replaced the pads and rotors, but the customer had written a note in red pen at the bottom. Brakes still grinding. Want second opinion? I told the driver to drop it in the far bay. It took me 10 minutes to pull the wheel. The pads were new. The rotors weren't. They were warped, scored deep, and hadn't been touched. Someone had slapped fresh pads on and called it done. I took a photo and texted it to the customer. She called me back in under a minute. Are you serious? I'm looking at it right now. I paid $800. I know. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, fix it. I don't care what it costs. Just fix it right. I did. I charged her half what she'd already paid, and I sent her copies of everything. The old rotors, the new ones, the invoice. She posted it that night with a side-by-side of the 2 work orders. It got shared 40 times before I went to bed. The second tow truck showed up Thursday, then another Friday. By the following Monday, I'd had 6 cars dropped off in 4 days, all from people who'd been to my old shop in the last month and wanted someone else to check the work. Every single one had something wrong. A timing belt that hadn't been replaced, a coolant flush that never happened, an alignment so bad the car pulled hard left the moment you let go of the wheel. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon, a woman in a gray blazer walked into my bay holding a leather portfolio. Are you the owner? I wiped my hands and nodded. She pulled a business card from her pocket and handed it to me. State Licensing Board, Consumer Protection Division. I'm following up on some complaints filed against a repair facility in the area. I understand you used to work there. I looked at the card, then at her. I did. How long ago did you leave? About 8 months. She opened the portfolio and clicked a pen. And you left voluntarily? I was laid off. She wrote something down. Do you have any records from your time there? Work orders, invoices, anything that shows what services were performed under your name? I hesitated. I might. I'd like to see them if you do. We're trying to establish a timeline. There's been a significant uptick in complaints over the last 6 months, and we're trying to determine whether it's a pattern or a coincidence. I walked over to the filing cabinet in the corner and pulled out a binder. It was stuffed with copies of every job I'd done in my last 2 years at the shop, every inspection, every part I'd ordered, every client I'd called to explain a repair. I'd kept them because I didn't trust the kid to take over my client list without screwing something up. Turned out I'd been right. I handed her the binder. She flipped through it slowly, scanning the dates, the signatures, the notes I'd written in the margins. She stopped on one page and tapped it with her pen. This is thorough. I didn't want anyone coming back saying I'd missed something. She looked up at me. Did you ever witness any fraudulent billing while you were there? No. Any pressure to upsell or recommend unnecessary services? Not from him. He ran it pretty straight. She made another note. And after you left? I didn't answer right away. She waited. I don't know what happened after I left, I said. I wasn't there. That's fine. She handed me a receipt, then looked around the bay. Her eyes landed on the stack of work orders pinned to the corkboard by the door. Clients I'd taken in over the last 2 months, all of them with notes and follow-up dates written in my handwriting. You're doing good work here, she said. I try. She smiled, just a little. You're about to be very busy. She left without saying anything else. I stood there for a minute, staring at the receipt in my hand, trying to figure out what she meant. I found out 3 days later. A guy I knew from the tire shop called me and said the state had shown up at my old boss's place with a notice. They were opening a formal investigation into consumer fraud and deceptive practices. They'd pulled records going back a year and were interviewing every customer who'd filed a complaint. They've got a whole team, he said. This isn't some slap on the wrist. They're going after his license. I didn't say anything. You hear me? Yeah, I hear you. Man, I don't know what you did, but you picked the right time to get out. I hung up and went back to work. That weekend, my phone didn't stop. Texts, calls, messages through my website. People asking if I had openings, if I could fit them in, if I could take a look at something another shop had done. I started a wait list. It hit 20 names by Sunday night. Monday morning, I got a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. I almost deleted it, but something made me listen. It was my old boss. His voice was different, tight, clipped, like he was forcing the words out. Hey, it's me. I don't know if you've heard, but the state's been here. They're going through everything. They're talking to customers, pulling files, asking about work that was done under my license. I just wanted to reach out and, I don't know. I thought maybe you could help clarify some things. If they call you, I mean. Just tell them the truth. That's all. Tell them what it was like when you worked here. That we ran a good shop. That we did right by people. There was a long pause. I heard him breathe. Anyway, call me if you get a chance. He hung up. I deleted the message and put my phone in my pocket. That afternoon, another tow truck pulled in. This time, it was a guy I recognized. One of my old regulars. Someone I used to see every 3 months for oil changes and tire rotations. He climbed out of his truck and walked over, hands shoved in his jacket. Hey, he said, I'm done with that place. I want you to handle everything from now on. What happened? They charged me for a transmission service I didn't ask for. Said it was part of the inspection. I looked it up. It wasn't. So I called them. And the kid told me I was remembering it wrong. I nodded. When do you need it done? Whenever you've got time. I'm not in a rush. I just want it done right. I added his name to the list. By the end of the week, I'd hired a second tech. The calls started coming every day after that. I'd see his name light up my screen and I'd let it ring through. He'd leave voicemails. Long, rambling ones where his voice would crack halfway through, and he'd pause like he was trying to pull himself together before finishing. The first few, he kept it vague. Just checking in. Wanted to see how you're doing. Thought we could catch up. By the fourth one, he dropped the act. Look, I know things didn't end great between us. I get that. But this thing with the state, it's getting out of hand. They're asking about jobs from 2 years ago. They're pulling invoices, calling customers, going through everything. I just need someone who can vouch for how we ran things back then. Someone who was there. Someone they'll believe. I deleted it. The next day he called twice. Then 3 times the day after that. I stopped listening to the messages. I could see the length of them getting longer. 2 minutes, then 4, then 6. I pictured him sitting in his office with the door closed, phone pressed to his ear, trying to find the right words to make me answer. I didn't. Then, on a Thursday morning, I was under a Civic replacing a clutch when my phone buzzed on the workbench. I ignored it. It buzzed again, then again. I slid out and wiped my hands, and when I picked it up, I had 5 missed calls and 3 texts, all from him. Please call me. I'm serious. I need to talk to you. This is important. I stared at the screen for a second, then I called him back. He picked up on the first ring. Thank God! I've been trying to to reach you for— What do you want? He went quiet. I heard him exhale, long and slow, like he'd been holding his breath. I need your help. With what? The state. They're saying I knowingly allowed fraudulent billing. They're saying I signed off on work that was never done. They're talking about pulling my license. Okay, that's it? What do you want me to say? I want you to tell them the truth. That when you worked here, we ran a clean shop. That we didn't cut corners. That we did good work. I didn't answer right away. I looked around my bay, at the cars lined up waiting, at the stack of invoices on my desk, at the new tech I'd hired last week who was pulling a wheel in the next stall. I can't help you, I said. Why not? Because I wasn't there. I don't know what happened after you fired me. I didn't fire you, I laid you off. Same thing. It's not the same thing. It is to me. He was quiet again. Then his voice dropped, and I heard something in it I'd never heard before. Panic. Please, I'm asking you, just give them a statement. Just tell them what it was like when you were here. That's all I need. I thought about the brake job, the timing belt that was never replaced, the alignment that damn near put someone in a ditch. I thought about the woman in the gray blazer and the binder I'd handed her, and the way she'd smiled when she walked out of my shop. You fired the wrong guy, I said. Then I hung up. He didn't call back. 2 days later, I was under a lift, swapping a timing belt on a Camry when I heard the sirens. They were faint at first, just a low wail in the distance, but they got louder fast. I kept working. The radio was on, some classic rock station playing too loud, and I had the tensioner halfway off when I heard the first siren cut out close by, maybe 2 blocks over, then another, then a third. I slid out from under the car and looked toward the bay door. My tech was standing there, wrench in hand, staring out at the street. What's going on? I asked. Don't know. Sounds like it's coming from over by the old industrial park. I wiped my hands on a rag and walked to the door. The sirens had stopped, but I could see flashing lights reflecting off the buildings down the block, red and blue, strobing in quick bursts. I knew where they were. I didn't say anything. I just went back to the lift and finished the timing belt. I worked through lunch. I didn't check my phone. I didn't turn on the news. I kept my head down and my hands busy, and I didn't let myself think about what was happening 2 miles away. That night, after I locked up, I drove past his shop. I told myself I wasn't going to. I told myself it didn't matter, that whatever was happening over there had nothing to do with me. But when I got to the intersection, I turned left instead of right, and I took the long way home. The parking lot was lit up like a stage. There were 3 police cruisers parked at angles near the bay doors, light bars still flashing. Yellow tape was stretched across the entrance, and a uniformed officer stood just inside it, arms crossed, watching a pair of plainclothes detectives walk in and out of the building with clipboards and evidence bags. I slowed down as I passed, just enough to see. The nephew was sitting in the back of one of the cruisers. His hands were behind his back and his head was tilted forward, staring at his knees. A reporter stood on the sidewalk with a camera crew, talking into a microphone, and I could see the shop's sign lit up behind her in the frame. I kept driving. When I got home, I sat in my truck for a minute, engine off, staring at the steering wheel. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out and saw a text from the guy who'd called me a few weeks ago, the one who worked at the tire shop. Did you see? I didn't reply. Another buzz. This time it was a link to a news article. The headline was already loaded in the preview. Local auto repair shop owner arrested in consumer fraud investigation. I opened it. The article was short, maybe 3 paragraphs. It said the state had executed a search warrant earlier that day and arrested the owner's nephew on multiple counts of fraud and deceptive business practices. It said the owner was cooperating with investigators but had not been charged. It said the shop's business license had been suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. At the bottom, there was a quote from the lead investigator. We take consumer protection very seriously. When businesses violate that trust, there are consequences. I closed the article and set my phone on the seat. Then I got out of the truck and went inside. The next morning, I had 12 messages waiting when I opened the shop. 10 of them were new clients. One was from a supplier asking if I needed to set up a bulk account. The last one was from a woman asking if I was taking apprentices. Her son wanted to learn the trade, and she'd heard I ran an honest shop. I called her back first. I opened the bay door at 6:30 the next morning and found him sitting in his truck in my parking lot. He was parked crooked, one tire up on the curb, like he'd pulled in fast and hadn't bothered to straighten out. His head was down, hands gripping the steering wheel, and for a second, I thought maybe he'd fallen asleep. Then he looked up and saw me standing there. He got out. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him. His shirt was wrinkled, half untucked, and there were dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. His hair was a mess. He walked toward me slow, like his legs weren't sure they wanted to carry him. I need to talk to you, he said. I didn't move. I'm working. Please, just 5 minutes. I looked past him at his truck, then back at his face. He looked desperate. Not angry, not defensive, just desperate. 5 minutes, I said. He followed me inside. I didn't offer him a chair. I walked to the workbench and started laying out tools for the day's first job, a brake replacement on a Silverado that was already parked in the second bay. They're coming for me, he said. I didn't look up. Who is? The state. The investigator. She's scheduled another meeting for this afternoon, and she's bringing someone from the Attorney General's office. They're saying I'm liable for everything. Every fraudulent charge, every fake repair, every customer who got screwed. They're putting it all on me. Sounds about right. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know what he was doing. I set down a socket wrench and finally looked at him. You knew. I didn't. You signed the invoices. You approved the charges. You saw the numbers. I trusted him. That's on you. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His shoulders sagged. He looked around the shop, at the cars, at the tools, at the invoices stacked neatly on my desk. Then he looked back at me. You were always better at this than I was, he said. The paperwork, the records, keeping everything straight. I was never good at that part. That's why I kept you around. Until you didn't. Explain what? That I'm not a criminal, that I ran a legitimate business, that I didn't know what he was doing. I picked up the wrench again and turned it over in my hands. You want me to lie. I want you to tell the truth. The truth is you fired me to make room for a scammer and now you're paying for it. His jaw tightened. I didn't fire you. I laid you off. You made a choice. You chose him over me. You chose family over competence. And now you're here asking me to clean up the mess. I'm asking you to help me. No, I said. You're asking me to save you. He stared at me. His hands were shaking. But please. I set the wrench down and crossed my arms. What time's your meeting? 2 o'clock. Where? At my shop. The investigator said she wanted to do a walkthrough, go over the records one more time. I nodded slowly. Okay. His face lit up. You'll come? No, I said, but I'll make sure she has what she needs. The confusion hit him fast. What does that mean? I walked past him to my desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a thick accordion folder, the kind with elastic bands holding it shut. I'd been keeping it there for 2 months, updating it every week, adding new invoices and receipts and copies of every job I'd completed since I opened my doors. I pulled it out and set it on the desk. What is that? He asked. Documentation, I said. Every job I did while I worked for you, every invoice I wrote, every part I ordered, every hour I logged, all of it clean, all of it honest, all of it backed up with customer signatures and vendor receipts. He stared at the folder. Why do you have that? Because I knew this was coming. His face went pale. You're giving that to the investigator. I already did, I said. She came by yesterday. He took a step back. What? She called me last week. Said she wanted to ask me a few questions about how the shop operated when I was there. I told her to come by. We sat in my office for an hour. I walked her through everything. How we track jobs, how we build customers, how we handled parts and labor. Then I gave her that. He looked at the folder like it was a bomb. You set me up. I gave her the truth. You sabotaged me. I protected myself, I said, and I made sure she knew the difference between your shop and mine. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and I could see the muscles in his jaw working, like he was trying to find words and failing. You should go, I said. You've got a meeting to get to. He stood there for another few seconds, staring at me, his face red and his breathing heavy. Then he turned and walked out. He didn't say anything. He didn't slam the door. He just left. I watched him get in his truck and peel out of the lot, tires squealing as he turned onto the street. Then I went back to work. At 2:15, my phone buzzed. It was a text from the guy at the tire shop. State just suspended his license. It's all over the news. I didn't reply. I just finished torquing the last lug nut on the Silverado and moved on to the next job. By 4 o'clock, I had 3 more texts. One from a former coworker asking if I'd heard. One from a parts supplier saying they'd stopped doing business with the old shop. One from a customer I hadn't talked to in 6 months, asking if I had availability next week. I answered the last one. At 5:30, I locked up and walked to my truck. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the lot, and the air smelled like oil and exhaust and fresh asphalt from the road crew working 2 blocks over. I sat in the cab for a minute, engine off, and pulled up the news on my phone. The article had more details this time. The state had suspended the shop's license indefinitely pending a full audit. The nephew was facing 8 counts of consumer fraud and 2 counts of forgery. The owner, my old boss, was listed as a person of interest, but hadn't been charged. Yet, there was a quote from the investigator near the bottom. This investigation was made possible by the cooperation of former employees who provided critical documentation. We encourage anyone with information about fraudulent practices to come forward. I closed the article and set my phone on the seat. Then I started the truck and drove home. The next morning, I had 23 messages waiting. 15 were new clients. 4 were from mechanics I used to work with asking if I was hiring. 2 were from suppliers offering discounts. 1 was from a reporter asking for a comment. I ignored the last one. I called back 2 of the mechanics. One of them started the following Monday. By the end of the week, I'd scheduled out 3 weeks of work. I had to start turning people away. I hired a second tech, then a third. I moved 2 of my jobs to the second bay and started using the third for diagnostics only. I drove past the old shop once, 2 weeks later, just to see. The lights were off. The bay doors were closed. There was a notice taped to the front window. Something official, white paper with a state seal at the top. I didn't stop to read it. The for lease sign went up 3 days after that. I didn't drive by again. One night, about a month later, I was closing up when I saw a car pull into the lot. It was a gray sedan, same one I'd seen before, and when the door opened, the woman in the blazer stepped out. She walked over, hands in her coat pockets, and stopped a few feet from the bay door. Evening, she said. Evening. Wanted to stop by and say thank you. Your records were incredibly helpful. Just doing my job. She smiled. You did more than that. You made our case airtight. Without your documentation, we'd still be chasing paper trails and trying to match invoices to complaints. You handed us everything we needed. I wiped my hands on a rag and leaned against the workbench. What happens now? The nephew's going to trial. Probably looking at jail time and restitution. The owner's cooperating, but he's not off the hook. We're still reviewing his involvement. Good. She looked around the shop, at the cars lined up in the bays, at the tools hung neatly on the walls. You've done well for yourself. I do honest work. I can see that. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card. If you ever need anything, reference, testimony, whatever, give me a call. I took the card and slipped it into my shirt pocket. Appreciate it. She nodded, then turned and walked back to her car. I watched her drive away, then I locked the bay door and turned off the lights. The shop was quiet. The air smelled like metal and grease and cold concrete. I stood there for a second, looking around at everything I'd built, everything I'd earned. Then I went home. The first snow came in late December, heavy and silent, blanketing the lot in white by morning. I got to the shop early like always, boots crunching across the frozen ground, and flipped on the lights. 3 cars were already waiting outside the bay, owners due in before 8. I made coffee in the back office and looked at the schedule pinned to the wall. Booked solid through January, 2 new hires starting after the holidays, a 3rd bay lease signed for February. On my way back to the floor, I passed the window and saw the street outside. The old shop was 2 blocks down, just visible past the intersection. The building sat dark, same as it had for weeks. Snow piled against the bay doors. The for lease sign hung crooked in the wind, one corner torn loose. I didn't stop to look. I turned back to the bench, pulled on my gloves, and opened the first work order of the day. The Silverado needed an alignment. The sedan after that needed new rotors. The truck after that needed a full tune-up and an oil change. I got to work. The wrench turned smooth in my hand, each bolt tightening with a clean, familiar click. Honest work. Clean records. No shortcuts. By noon, the first job was done. I wiped my hands and moved to the next. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop your favorite part in the comments. See you in the next one.